Hi, my name is Dr. William Murphy, and I'm a 2020 graduate of the DIAL program at St. John's University, and my particular area of interest for research is secondary social studies education. Today we'll be discussing teacher perceptions of standard-based reforms in social studies education. Starting in 2000, there was a flurry of education reform legislation that was passed, including No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, APPR reform, and most recently the revised New York State K through 12 social studies framework. In that flurry of legislation, it was found in other studies that teachers had lost their voice because of the rapidly evolving educational landscape. And in 2018, Singer found that content area teachers outside of English language arts are now supposed to emphasize literacy experiences instead of the subjects that they are supposed to be teaching. The purpose of the study is that by investigating the experiences and opinions of social studies teachers, the study provides a voice to a constituency of stakeholders who have essentially been marginalized in a rapidly evolving educational landscape. This study seeks to identify teachers' perceptions regarding the legitimacy of federal, state, and local education policies as they pertain to the overall social studies education and their own personal practices. The theoretical framework for the study was David Laberle's Goals of American Education that included democratic equality, social efficiency, and social mobility, as well as critical theory that strives to expose an illegitimate power's exploitation of some aspect of society with the ultimate purpose of improvement through corrective actions. The significance of this study is that it may be utilized to inform college-level teacher preparatory programs, administrators, teachers, students, and parents to tailor instruction and activities in a way that would empower novice social studies teachers to successfully incorporate and adopt educational policy into their pedagogy, as well as improve educator training and professional development that benefits social studies teachers, as well as helps to provide a comprehensive social studies education for all students. This study is connected to the Vincentian mission in education because it will be instrumental in challenging institutional structures that serve as barriers to improving the education system as a whole. The research questions that are asked in the study are: 1. What are secondary social studies teachers' perceptions regarding the impact of federal, state, and local education policies on social studies education between the years 2000 and 2020? And 2, what are secondary social studies teachers' perceptions regarding the impact of standard-based reforms on their personal professional practices in social studies education? In reviewing the related literature, teacher perceptions of standard-based education reforms had created an us versus them mentality. Teachers believed that they were less effective as a result of APPR, and teachers perceived that they were accountable for factors outside of their control, being summed up in what Andrea Labresco called No Child Left Behind's soft bigotry of low expectations for teachers. As far as standards-based reforms in social studies curriculum materials, it was found that the materials were not student-friendly, and teachers did not possess adequate training to promote literacy skills. State standards didn't generally align with widely used textbooks. Materials were aligned only to standards adopted by a few group of states with large populations. It was also found that there was a need for effective social studies curriculum and pedagogy because students possessed little understanding about their role in American politics, as well as lacking a nuanced understanding of American political parties. It was found that 96% of social studies teachers believed that their purpose was to foster critical thinking skills, while only 64% of teachers believed that they actually helped students learn subject knowledge content. The methodological framework for the study was grounded theory. Grounded theory was chosen because it was beneficial when existing theories are not fully able to address the issues that are being studied. It also serves as a conceptual framework that begins with a question and leads to the collection of qualitative data. Multiple rounds of data were collected, analyzed, and coded in this grounded theory study. Coding leads to constructed categories, and the process results in the emergence of new concepts, and those concepts form the basis of new theories. The setting for this study was provided through access to a central high school district located in Long Island, New York, and was ascertained through the written permission of the superintendent's office. Purposeful sampling was used for this study. The goal of purposeful sampling is to intentionally obtain specific insight from a group of people that are best qualified to provide the necessary information regarding a topic. 16 secondary 7th through 12th grade social studies teachers were chosen. 4 were tenured with 15 or more years of experience, 5 were tenured with between 5 and 15 years of experience, and 5 were untenured teachers with less than 4 years of experience. 2 administrators with at least 15 years of experience were also chosen to participate in the study to round out the purpose of triangulating data. The data collection procedures for this study followed Glaser and Strauss's 1967 work that defined the conceptual design of grounded theory. So in order to collect enough data to generate the development of the new theory, successive rounds of triangulated data were collected through focus groups, one-on-one interviews, and document analysis that included lesson plans. Data collection continued until it reached saturation point, which is when themes within categories begin to repeat and it becomes clear that additional data cease to be beneficial. The data collection procedures for the focus group included 3 to 5 participants in one of 4 groups. There were 2 middle school groups and 2 high school groups. The focus groups provided detailed information as well as a dynamic group experience. The interview protocol followed a 40 to 60 minute semi-structured interview. Responses were electronically recorded and transcribed, and transcripts were given to the participants in order to confirm their accuracy. All of the interview protocols were concluded over a 3-period, 6-week program. The trustworthiness of the study's design was developed through the triangulation of data, an audit trail of all interviews and focus groups, member checking where participants were able to look over the information that had been recorded, as well as peer review by experts in the social studies field. Researcher ethics were established by the following St. John's IRB guidelines. Access to the school district was ascertained through written permission from the superintendent's office, and potential participants were recruited through public postings. Candidates who volunteered for participation were screened for the requisite qualifications and contacted via follow-up emails. All participant information that was collected remained confidential both during and after the conclusion of the study. Collected data remained solely with the researcher and will not be shared with another entity. Participants were guaranteed confidentiality and were free to withdraw from the study at any time. The data analysis was processed through a multi-step design. The coding of data included memoing, where the researcher records initial observations for data for future analysis and interpretation, open coding, which identified overarching core phenomena, and axial coding, that breaks down core phenomena into smaller, distinct categories. These steps were outlined by Strauss and Corbin's 1998 work on qualitative analysis. Analysis of the data in this study followed this pattern of categorization, development, and comparison to emerging ideas, and was repeated until it culminated in the development of 3 overarching themes that formed the basis of a new comprehensive theory regarding social studies teachers' perceptions of standard-based reforms. As the lead researcher for this study, it was important that in this qualitative study that I acknowledge my position as a social studies teacher for the past 20 years, that I participated as an employee in the district where the school district had taken place. And having entered the teaching profession in 2000, I personally witnessed the changes to the social studies education that occurred as a result of standard-based education reforms on the federal, state, and local levels, as well as my personal demographic history. By declaring my personal biases, I maintained my awareness of them and implemented safeguards to assure their limitation. Time was set aside to reflect on how personal values and biases shape my interpretation of collected data. An audit trail was created by taking notes on my reactions to the responses to the themes that emerged out of collected data. I shared my reflections with my mentor throughout the rounds of data collection, and I developed a relationship with the teachers and administrative participants that was separate from the one that exists between my professional colleagues. Discussion of the study was strictly limited to predetermined and allotted times for focus groups, interviews, and data collection, and all responses and data obtained from the participants as part of the study remained confidential. The first theme to emerge from collected data was that of an ideal social studies education, and it found that participants believed that goal was to deliver content as well as foster citizenship to develop critical thinking skills and provide skills that would eventually become necessary to participate in the economy. It was also found that participants believed that the story of social studies should allow the subject to come alive. It should also be a constructivist subject, where active, hands-on, project-based assignments were used in the classroom. And finally, the participants believe that social studies should be comprehensive in its scope and interdisciplinary in its implementation. The second theme to emerge revolved around the structural changes that emerged in social studies due to the implementation of standards-based reforms. Participants shared that there was too much of a focus on teaching to the test, that skill development came at the expense of content, and that there was too much to teach and not enough time to teach it. Participants also shared that they had insufficient knowledge of the standards, the framework, and see-through inquiries. And finally, teachers had difficulty in promoting specific reading and literacy skills that were associated with the standards. As part of these structural changes, participants acknowledged that the implementation of standard-based reforms had several negative effects. These included constant and rapid change, expectations that were not age-appropriate at particular grade levels, a feeling that teachers were asked to be reinventing the wheel and use resources that didn't align with the standards. Participants also felt that they were being micromanaged and that teachers were powerless to challenge the system in front of them. This created a sense of frustration and being overwhelmed on the part of teachers. Collected data also found that there were several positive effects that emerged out of the implementation of standards-based reforms. These included the incorporation of critical thinking skills as part of the daily pedagogy in social studies classrooms. Participants said that reforms provided necessary benchmarks through standardized tests, and that new teachers were much less negatively impacted by standard-based reform than their older counterparts. Finally, APPR, which was a source of major consternation amongst teachers in earlier research, was not found to have a major negative influence. The third overarching theme to emerge from collected data was that of disengagement on the part of social studies teachers resulting from standard-based reform implementation. Teachers' attempts to mitigate the negative effects included seeking collaborative professional development with other social studies colleagues, to seek out opportunities for electives that provided the ability to focus on content over literacy skills, and the desire to teach courses and grades that did not end with standardized tests because they provided a pressure-free atmosphere for both the teachers and their pupils. In response to the first research question, this study found that reform implementation represented a movement away from teachers' ideal vision of a comprehensive social studies education. Standard-based reform implementation resulted in teaching to the test, which was identified as the most destructive consequence of reform implementation in social studies. Teachers also felt compelled to choose between making historical content come alive for their students and promote critical thinking skills and literacy skills. Finally, teachers, particularly veteran teachers, perceive standard-based reforms as being a hindrance to their goal of deepening student understanding. Additionally, reform implementation resulted in a breakdown in communication between social studies teachers, administrators, and policymakers. Teacher frustrations were augmented by a sense that no one is going to listen. This epitomized the notion that classroom practitioners have lost their voice, that teachers' perceptions indicate an imbalanced power structure within social studies education that is both irrational and unjust. This is because teachers experience difficulty in promoting literacy-based standard reforms that stemmed from their admitted lack of expertise. Teachers were open about their frustrations, making statements such as they were not prepared at all, extremely overwhelmed, or not trained to implement those standards. And finally, administrators were largely unaware of the extent of frustration and lack of knowledge that the teachers experienced. This disconnect demonstrated an absence of open lines of communications between teachers and other administrators and the larger educational community. In response to the second research question, this study found that social studies teachers seek to escape the negative effects of standard-based reforms by retreating into courses and grades that are not constrained by standardized assessments. Teachers were disheartened by the belief that curriculum and classroom activities were dictated by the changes to the social studies framework and learning standards, and not by the professionals within the classroom. This sense was stronger amongst veteran teachers, but all teachers felt handcuffed in the focus on literacy and thinking skills over content and classroom activities. This created a feeling of powerlessness that isolated teachers and forced them to seek refuge in the electives and grade levels that are governed less by standards-based reform implementation. Additionally, The study also found that teachers do seek meaningful collaboration with colleagues to develop effective strategies for standards-based reform implementation. All teachers across all demographics saw similar negative consequences of standard-based reform implementation. Veteran teachers held much stronger negative opinions about the reform implementation than their counterparts with less experience. But all teachers cited meaningful collaboration with administrators and colleagues as a positive means of incorporating standard-based reforms into their pedagogy. New teachers participated in more collaborative sessions because they were contractually required to regularly meet with administrators and peers as part of their school tenure process. But effective collaboration could be either prescribed or informal, and was described by all teachers across all demographics of alleviating some of the negative effects of reform implementation. This study confirmed existing research by finding the following. It found that rigid testing programs and prescribed curriculums resulted in the loss of constructivist activities and meaningful teacher interactions. Teachers had settled into an us versus them mentality that was the result of a top-down hierarchy limiting teacher autonomy. It also found, in accordance with existing research, that teachers supported the idea that contemporary social studies education should foster critical thinking skills, but had failed to effectively communicate historical content. It also found that social studies teachers struggled to promote literacy skills in an area which they felt they had no expertise. And finally, it confirmed existing research by finding that social studies teachers struggled with available social studies materials because they did not fully align with the adopted standards within a given region. This study challenged existing research by finding that the APPR, Annual Professional Performance Review, did not result in personal discouragement or a distrust of the educational establishment among participants. Likewise, when discussing APPR, multiple participants stated that it was a non-factor or that it had zero impact on them whatsoever. As this study followed a grounded theory model, the new theory that emerged from collected data follows as this. Standard-based reform implementation resulted in a shift in the structure of social studies education. Increased literacy and critical thinking skills throughout the social studies curriculum created a loss of focus on historical content and constructivist activities. As a result, teachers felt overwhelmed, frustrated, micromanaged, isolated, powerless, and voiceless. In an attempt to mitigate the impact of standard-based reform implementation, teachers attempted to regain their lost autonomy by following one of two avenues: by either retreating into elective courses or grade levels not impacted by the reforms as much as core subjects, or by participating in collaborative professional development with peers seeking to find alternate ways to alleviate the effects of standard-based reforms. Recommendations for future practice and research include that steps must be taken in order to restore teachers' sense of autonomy within the classroom. Policymakers should engage in opportunities for constructive dialogue with classroom practitioners. Administrators should make teachers part of the process for developing education policy that would make future education policy more accessible and user-friendly. The Social Studies Content Advisory Panel should have representatives who meet regularly with local social studies teachers across the state in order to elicit opinions that would be instrumental in shaping future education policy. And the New York State Department of Education should electronically canvass the opinions of social studies teachers across the state on a regular basis. Furthermore, districts should provide ongoing, meaningful, collaborative, and professional development opportunities to handle the struggles that are associated with standard-based reform implementation. In order to produce a larger body of research, future studies could replicate the methodology and interview protocols employed by this study with teachers from diverse school districts in different settings. Future studies could investigate the impact of standard-based reforms on different populations of teachers who teach different subjects. Since new teachers were less frustrated by reforms, future studies could inquire into the efficacy of different teacher preparatory programs, resulting in different views about standard-based reform implementation.